If you'd asked me a year ago what I'd be doing this summer, I would have said something boring. Working extra shifts, maybe binging old shows, definitely nothing exciting. I wouldn't have guessed I'd spend it at a lake house with a guy the first hadn't seen since freshman year of high school. But that's exactly what happened. It started with a random Facebook message from someone I almost didn't recognize at first, Dylan Harper. The last time I'd heard that name was 5 years ago. We'd been tight in middle school. Comic books, sleepovers, too many inside jokes. Then his family moved 2 towns over, and he basically vanished from my life. The message was simple. Hey man, random, but do you remember me? Dylan Harper from middle school? Yeah, I remembered him. He looked different in his profile pic. Taller, leaner. Still had that crooked smile. We caught up a bit. Nothing deep, just surface-level stuff. Then a few nights later, he sent another message. I'm staying at my grandparents' Lakehouse this summer. Place is huge. You should come hang out for a while. I've got an extra room and it's boring as hell out here. I said yes before I could talk myself out of it. The Lakehouse was about 2 hours from the city, tucked at the edge of a pine forest that looked like it belonged in a movie. When I pulled into the gravel driveway, he was already waiting on the porch, leaning against the rail with a beer in one hand and a tank top that had clearly lost the battle against the summer heat. Dude, he grinned as I got out of the car. You actually showed up. I told you I would, I said, laughing. We hugged like old friends who never stopped being friends. It was a little awkward, a little too long, but it felt right. He smelled like sunscreen and lake water. The house itself was rustic but clean, 2 stories, with a dock that stretched out over still, perfect water. The kind of place you'd see on a postcard. You're upstairs, second door on the left, Dylan said as we walked in. Bathrooms across the hall. The water pressure sucks, but the view makes up for it. Everything about that first day was easy. Comfortable, like no time had passed. The first few days went by in a haze of lazy mornings, sunburned afternoons, and beer-soaked evenings. We grilled out, swam, listened to dumb playlists from high school, and sat on the dock talking about life like it hadn't been 5 years since we'd spoken. Dylan had that same energy I remembered. Laid back but sharp, the kind of guy who could make you feel like the most interesting person in the world, just by listening. But about a week in, things started to shift. Nothing dramatic, just little things. One night, we were sitting on the dock. It was late, real late. The sky was smeared with stars, and the lake looked like a sheet of black glass. Dylan was staring up at the sky. He had a beer bottle between his hands, rolling it back and forth. Then he said, "You ever think about how things would have been different if I didn't move away?" I glanced at him. Yeah, sometimes. He nodded slowly. I used to think about that a lot. Something about the way he said it made my chest tighten. He wasn't just talking about missed birthdays or forgotten inside jokes. What brought that on? I asked. He shrugged. Just been thinking a lot since I got here. It's quiet, too much time in my own head. He didn't say anything else for a while. Just leaned back on his elbows and looked out over the water. That night, I barely slept. The next morning, I walked into the kitchen and found him shirtless, flipping pancakes. Sunlight cut across his back in a way I had no business noticing. He handed me a plate, and when our fingers touched, he didn't pull away right away. It wasn't an accident. I looked up, and he was already watching me. He didn't look away. I didn't know what to do with the way he looked at me. I don't even think he knew what he was doing. Or maybe he did. Either way, something shifted that morning. We sat at the kitchen table, eating pancakes in silence. Not tense silence, just loaded. Like something unsaid had slipped into the room, and neither of us wanted to be the first to name it. You sleep okay? Dylan asked, casually enough. I nodded, swallowing a mouthful. Yeah, you? Out cold, he said. But the way he said it, half smile, eyes flicking up from his plate, felt like a test. Like he was seeing if I'd bring up the night before. The doc. What he said. The look we shared. I didn't. Later that day, We ended up down by the water. The sun was brutal, but the breeze off the lake made it bearable. We dragged out the old canoe from under the dock, even though it was kind of a wreck. Paint peeling, one of the paddles half splintered. Dylan grinned as we shoved it into the water. "We'd die out there. It's on you." "Noted," I said, climbing in behind him. The lake was calm, the kind of quiet that makes you feel like you're the only two people in the world. We paddled out aimlessly, then just drifted. Dylan leaned back, arms behind his head, sunglasses reflecting the sky. I couldn't help watching him, the way his chest moved with each breath, the curve of his jawline, the way a bead of sweat trailed down from his hairline to his collarbone. I looked away, heart thudding stupidly. He cracked open a beer and handed it to me. "You ever think about what it'd be like if you could just stay somewhere like this forever? Like a Lakehouse escape from everything kind of life?" He nodded. "Sometimes," I said, "but I don't think it's real. I think it's just a fantasy, something you want because real life is a mess." He looked at me for a moment, long enough that I felt my skin start to warm in places the sun couldn't reach. Maybe I like the idea of things being simple. That night, something else changed. We'd been up late, watching movies, sprawled on the couch. I was half dozing when Dylan stood up to grab something from the kitchen. He walked back in with a blanket over one shoulder and 2 bottles of water. "You should crash out here," he said. "It's cooler than your room." I sat up, blinking. "You kicking me out of my own bed?" He laughed, handing me a bottle. "Nah, just saying, you don't have to sleep alone." There was something about the way he said it. I couldn't pin it down, but it made me pause. I watched him sit down, unfolding the blanket, letting it drape over both of us. His thigh pressed against mine. He didn't move away. I didn't either. Around 2 a.m., I woke up. I was on my side, facing the back of the couch. Dylan was behind me, his arm draped casually over my waist. His hand was warm, resting just below my ribs. His breath was slow and steady on the back of my neck. I froze, not out of fear, just because I didn't know what the hell was happening. Was he asleep? Was he dreaming? Or was he doing this on purpose? Then he shifted slightly, and I felt his body press a little closer, just enough to erase the space between us. His hand flexed once on my stomach, then stilled again. I didn't move. Couldn't. The heat of his body, the weight of his arm. It was too much, and not enough at the same time. Then his lips brushed the back of my neck. Soft, barely there. I sucked in a breath, my whole body tensing. "Are you awake?" he whispered. I didn't answer at first. My heart was hammering too loudly. "Yeah," I finally said, my voice barely audible. He didn't move for a second. Then he exhaled, like he'd been holding his breath too. "I don't know why I'm doing this," he said quietly. I didn't know either. But I didn't stop him. His hand moved slowly up my chest, fingers skimming my shirt, like he wasn't even sure he was allowed to touch me, like he was waiting for me to pull away. But I didn't. I turned slightly, just enough to look back at him. And in the darkness, we stared at each other. No jokes, no tension, just something raw and real and terrifying. He didn't kiss me. Not at first. He just looked at me like he was trying to figure something out, like he wasn't even sure this was real. His hand stayed where it was, fingers barely touching the fabric of my shirt, and for a long moment we just breathed, the space between us charged and fragile. I don't know what he saw in my face, but whatever it was, it gave him enough courage to close the distance. His lips touched mine, hesitant, soft. It didn't feel like some bold, passionate movie kiss. It felt like a question, one I didn't need time to answer. I kissed him back, slow, careful, like we were both afraid we'd break whatever this was by moving too fast. His fingers curled lightly around my side, pulling me just a little closer, and I let it happen. Every part of me buzzed with disbelief, but none of it felt wrong. We broke apart after a few seconds. He didn't say anything, just looked at me. I was the one who finally spoke. "What are we doing?" His mouth twitched, half smile, half grimace. "I don't know." And that was the truth. Neither of us had a clue. The next morning was weird. Not in a bad way, just in a, holy shit, did that really happen? Kind of way. I woke up alone on the couch, the blanket half kicked off, and sunlight streaming in through the windows. Dylan was in the kitchen, making eggs like it was any other day. He glanced over when he saw me sit up. Hey, coffee's on. I nodded, rubbing the sleep from my eyes. Cool. We didn't say anything else for a minute. I watched him stir the pan, trying to read his body language. Nothing about him looked awkward or uncomfortable. But he also wasn't acting like a guy who had kissed his childhood friend in the middle of the night. I stood and stretched. So about last night, he turned slightly, a spatula in hand. Yeah? Do you want to talk about it? He shrugged. Do you? I hesitated. Kind of. He turned the stove off and faced me fully, crossing his arms. All right, let's talk. I leaned back against the counter. Was that a one-time thing, or... I don't know, he said. I didn't plan it, it just happened. You kissed me. Yeah, I did. He rubbed the back of his neck. And I'm not pretending it didn't mean something, but I also don't know what it meant. Not yet. That answer should have frustrated me. But it didn't. Because it was honest. We spent the next few days pretending nothing had happened, but the air between us told a different story. The way he glanced at me when he thought I wasn't looking, the way his hand would brush mine and linger a second too long, the silence that would stretch too far before one of us cracked a joke to break it. We didn't talk about it again, not until the night of the storm. It hit around midnight. Thunder cracked so loud it shook the windows, and the rain came down like the sky had something to prove. I was in my room reading when the power cut out, plunging everything into silence except for the drumming rain and the occasional boom of thunder. There was a knock on my door. I opened it to find Dylan standing there, holding a flashlight. You good? He asked, his voice a little too casual. I'm fine, I said. Just surprised you didn't wait for the lightning to flash dramatically behind you. He laughed, stepping inside. Too cliché. We sat on the edge of my bed, the flashlight set between us, casting weird shadows on the ceiling. I hate storms, he admitted after a while. Always have. Since when? Since forever. I just don't sleep well when it's like this. I nodded, then looked at him. So you came in here for sleep? He looked back at me, and I could see the answer in his face before he said it. No. He reached out, slow and tentative, fingers brushing mine. I've been thinking about that night, he said. The kiss. Me too. I don't know what this is, he said. I just know I don't want it to be nothing. My chest tightened. It's not nothing. He nodded, like he needed to hear that. Then he moved closer. This time, the kiss wasn't hesitant. It was deeper, hungrier, like we were both tired of pretending it hadn't happened. Like we were both afraid of what it meant, but even more afraid of what we'd lose if we didn't let it happen again. His hand slid into my hair. Mine gripped the back of his shirt. The thunder rolled in the distance, but all I could hear was the thud of my own heart and the soft, needy sounds between us. We didn't go too far. It wasn't about that. It was about closing the gap, about saying, without words, I feel this too. When we pulled apart, he rested his forehead against mine. Whatever this is, he whispered, I want to figure it out. With you. Yeah, I whispered back. Me too. The next morning, it was different, but not in the bad way I feared. Dylan was still asleep beside me, one arm tucked under his head, the other draped lazily over his stomach. His shirt was bunched up around his ribs, and he looked peaceful. Not confused or regretful, just calm. I lay there for a while, watching the sunlight crawl up the walls, wondering when the awkwardness would start, when one of us would say the wrong thing, when he'd pull away and act like it hadn't meant what it clearly did. But when he stirred and blinked at me through squinted eyes, all he said was, "Mornin'," in that groggy, just woke up voice that somehow made my chest ache. "Hey," I said. His eyes searched my face for a second, like he was checking the temperature of the room, trying to decide how much of last night had carried over into the day. Then he gave a sleepy little smile and muttered, "Kinda weird, huh?" I laughed quietly. Yeah, but not bad weird. No, he agreed, rubbing his face. Not bad at all. We didn't label anything. We didn't make some grand declaration. It wasn't that kind of thing. Not yet, anyway. But something had shifted. That day we moved through the world a little differently. A little more aware of each other. Dylan stood a little closer when we brushed past each other in the hallway. He touched my shoulder when we talked. Not in a flirty, showy way. Just casual, but meaningful. And when I looked over at him during lunch, he didn't look away. He just smiled. We spent the afternoon lying on the dock again, but this time I rested my head on my folded arms and let our legs graze without pulling away. The sky was a pale, cloudless blue, the lake glittering like glass. He was quiet for a while. Then he said, "So what happens when you leave?" The question hit harder than I expected. "I don't know," I said honestly. "I haven't thought that far ahead." "I have," he said. "I've been thinking about it too much, actually." I turned toward him. "What are you afraid of?" "That this is just some summer bubble," he said. "And when it pops, we both pretend it never happened." I sat up slowly, shielding my eyes from the sun. "Do you want it to be just a bubble?" "No," he said immediately. "But I don't know how to keep this going once you're back in the city. Once I'm not sleeping 10 feet from you." I felt the knot in my stomach twist. Because he was right. I hadn't thought about the end. I'd been so caught up in the moment that I forgot moments run out. But looking at him, sun in his eyes, hair a mess from the wind, I realized something. "I don't want this to end just because the summer does," I said. "We'll figure it out." He looked at me. Really looked at me. "You mean that?" "Yeah, I do." That night, we ended up back on the couch again. No movie, no distractions. Just the two of us, sitting in the dim light of a single lamp, saying everything we'd never said before. He told me about a relationship he had with a guy once, back in high school. How he'd buried it, convinced himself it didn't mean anything. How he thought he'd outgrown it, moved past it. "But you," he said, voice low, "you bring it back." That should have scared me. But it didn't. Instead, I reached for his hand. "I don't want to be something you have to suppress. I'm not a phase. And this doesn't feel like one either." He squeezed my hand, his thumb brushing across my knuckles. "You're not. This doesn't. That's the problem. It feels too real." "Then maybe it is." He leaned in slowly, giving me every second to back away. I didn't. Our kiss was slower this time. Not hesitant, not rushed, just deep, steady, like we had all the time in the world. When we broke apart, he whispered, "Stay with me tonight?" I nodded. "Yeah." We didn't have that. It wasn't about that. We just curled into each other on the pull-out couch, the TV flickering silently in the background, and talked until we fell asleep. He told me things I never knew, about his parents, divorce, about feeling stuck between who he thought he was supposed to be and who he might really be. I told him about the first guy the first ever liked, how I buried it for years, how no one really knew the whole story. With Dylan, it felt easy, like honesty didn't cost anything, like I didn't have to pretend anymore. The thing about falling for someone is, it doesn't usually feel like falling. It feels more like drifting. Like waking up in the middle of a lake and realizing the shore is farther than it was yesterday, and you don't remember when the tide pulled you out. That's how the rest of the summer felt. Not like a free fall, more like a slow pull into something we didn't know how to name. We didn't talk about what we were. There were no big labels or late night, "what are we doing" conversations. But everything we did said enough. The small touches became more natural, normal even. When we sat on the couch, I'd lean into his side, and he'd rest his arm across my shoulders. When we made breakfast, he'd come up behind me and nudge me with his chin, laughing when I pretended to be annoyed. We were orbiting each other constantly, quietly, instinctively, and neither of us pulled away. We also didn't go anywhere. The town was small and nosy, and neither of us was in a rush to deal with the reality that someone might see us holding hands at a gas station and suddenly have questions. The Lakehouse stayed our bubble, but we both knew the bubble couldn't last forever. One afternoon, we were out in the canoe again. This time, we brought snacks and floated aimlessly, our feet dangling over the edge. The air was thick with humidity, the kind that makes you feel like you're swimming even when you're not. Dylan was leaning back, a hat pulled low over his eyes. I nudged his leg. "You ever gonna actually ask me on a real date?" He looked over, smirking. "Aren't we on one right now? Sun, water, mystery, Pringles you found in the pantry." "I mean, like a real one, where we wear clothes with buttons and eat overpriced appetizers. You planning on taking me to Olive Garden or something?" I grinned. "Maybe." He chuckled. "I don't know. It's weird. I've never done any of that. Dating? Not like this." "Not like what?" He hesitated, then sat up. "Not with someone I actually care about." There it was. No flourish, no build-up, just the truth. It hit me square in the chest. I didn't say anything for a second, just let it hang there. Then I said, "Me neither." Later that night, we had our first fight. It was small, stupid. Something about the grill and a propane tank that wasn't empty like I swore it was. But the argument wasn't really about the grill. It was about the tension underneath. The countdown we were both pretending wasn't ticking. "I just don't get why you're being weird about it," I said, arms crossed as I stood on the deck. Dylan looked frustrated, running a hand through his hair. "Because every time we talk about after, you shut down. And I'm not the only one pretending like this place exists outside of time. You think I don't care?" I shot back. "That I'm just going to go back to the city and forget this happened?" "I don't know," he said. "That's the problem. I have no idea what you're thinking." I turned away, gripping the railing. My heart was pounding. "I'm scared," I admitted. "Okay? That's what I'm thinking. I don't know how to bring this into my real life. I don't know what I am to you once we leave this house." He didn't respond right away. Then I felt him come up behind me, his hand resting gently on my back. "You're the only thing about this summer that feels real." My throat tightened. I turned to face him, and we just stood there for a second. Quiet, close, both of us raw and a little worn out. "I don't have it all figured out," he said, "but I know I don't want to go back to being a friend I message once every 5 years. I want more than that." I exhaled slowly, nodding. "Me too." That night, we didn't kiss. We didn't even touch much. We just lay in bed, backs barely touching, silence stretching out comfortably between us. It wasn't the kind of quiet you get after a fight. It was the kind that follows honesty. The kind that means something just healed. The days started slipping by faster after that night. It was like the fight opened something up, like naming the fear made it easier to hold. We didn't pretend anymore. We still didn't use labels, but we didn't hide from what this was either. And somehow, that made everything sharper, more vivid. The way Dylan would catch my eye across the room and smirk like we shared a secret. The way he'd reach for my hand when we were out walking along the edge of the woods behind the house. The way he'd whisper stupid things into my ear just to hear me laugh. But the end was coming. We both knew it. We didn't talk about the date on the calendar. We just lived around it. One morning, I came downstairs to find him at the kitchen table with his laptop open, a bunch of sticky notes spread out around him. "Organizing your thoughts?" I asked, still rubbing sleep out of my eyes. "Trying to," he said. "I got a call from a guy the first used to intern with. Wants to know if I'd be interested in a carpentry apprenticeship." "That sounds awesome." "Yeah," he said. "It'd mean moving." "Oh." I paused. "How far?" He looked up at me. "Like, Boston far." I didn't say anything for a second. I just sat down across from him. He must have seen something flicker across my face, because he added, "I haven't said yes yet." "You should," I said, even though my stomach dropped when I said it. "You think?" "Yeah. You're good at that stuff. You should do it." He looked at me like he was trying to figure out if I meant it. I did, or at least I wanted to. But wanting what's best for someone doesn't always mean wanting what takes them farther from you. That night, we sat out on the dock again, wrapped in a blanket, a quiet chill rolling off the lake. "Do you remember that time in 7th grade?" Dylan said, "when we climbed the school roof?" I snorted. "You mean when you convinced me we wouldn't get caught, and then you left me up there to talk our way out of it?" He laughed. "I was buying us time. You were better at the innocent face." I shook my head. "You owe me for that." He looked over at me. Serious now. "I've been thinking about all the stuff we missed." "What do you mean?" "I don't know," he said. "Just all those years. What if we'd figured this out earlier?" I thought about that. About what life would have been like if he hadn't moved away. If we'd stayed close. If the feelings I buried back then hadn't needed so much time to resurface. "Maybe we needed the time," I said, "to figure out who we were." He nodded, quiet. "Still feels like we're out of time." The words landed hard. I turned to him, my chest tight. "We're not." "I leave next week," he said. "You go back to school. I don't know how we make this work." I swallowed. "We figure it out, like we said." He looked at me, and there was so much in his expression. Hope, fear, longing, and something like heartbreak. "I'm scared it won't be enough," he said softly. I reached for his hand. "Then let's not waste what we have left." We made love that night for the first time. I don't know what other word to use. It wasn't just some closeness. It wasn't a 1-minute weakness or a heat of the moment thing. It was slow, deliberate, filled with pauses and whispered yeses, and the kind of closeness that makes your chest ache. It was the way his fingers gripped mine, the way his eyes didn't look away, the way our breathing synced, like we were holding each other together with nothing but touch and trust. Afterward, we lay there in the dark, tangled up in sheets and sweat and something too big to name. "I wish this wasn't ending," he whispered into my skin. "Me too," I said. And I meant it with everything I had. The last morning came too fast. The suitcase was by the door. His phone buzzed with check-in reminders and weather updates. I sat on the couch, barefoot, clutching a mug of coffee I wasn't drinking. Dylan moved through the house slowly, like he was touching everything one last time. His hand slid along the edge of the kitchen counter. He stopped to tighten a loose knob on the hallway closet. None of it needed doing. It was stalling. We both knew it. "I should get going soon," he said, not quite meeting my eyes. I nodded, but my throat was tight. "Yeah." We hadn't talked about what would happen after he left. Not since that night on the dock. Not even after everything we'd said and done. Because what do you say? Please don't go? Stay even if it means giving up your future? I couldn't ask that. I wouldn't. So instead, I stood up and walked over to him. He was at the door, keys in hand, biting the inside of his cheek. "You'll let me know when you get there?" I asked. "First thing," he said. We stood there in the silence, the weight of everything that wasn't being said hanging in the air between us. "I don't want to say goodbye," he said suddenly. "It's not goodbye," I whispered. "Just see you later." He pulled me in then, hugged me tighter than he ever had before. His hand stayed on the back of my neck for a beat longer than it needed to. "I don't want this to be just a summer thing," he said into my shoulder. "It won't be. I don't know what it'll look like, but I want to keep trying. Even if it's hard, even if it's messy." I pulled back to look at him. "Me too." He kissed me, quick but firm. Then he opened the door. The screen creaked. The gravel crunched under his boots. He didn't look back. That night, the house felt like a museum. Too quiet, too still. I found one of his shirts balled up under the couch and held it like an idiot for 20 minutes before forcing myself to get up and put it away. He texted me around 10 p.m., "Made it. Miss you already." I stared at it for a minute, then replied, "Same. I'm glad you're there. We'll talk tomorrow? Promise." The first week without him was rough. Everything reminded me of him. The way the screen door slammed, the smell of the lake air in the morning, his toothbrush still in the bathroom drawer which I refused to move. We FaceTimed at night. Nothing heavy. Just recapping our days, talking shit, laughing like we always had. But sometimes there'd be these pauses, these stretches of quiet where we just look at each other and know we were both feeling the same ache, the distance, the fear of it slipping away. But it didn't. Not then. He started sending me pictures of the shop he was working in. Half-built tables, crooked stools he'd joke were artfully asymmetrical. I started texting him snapshots of my life. Coffee shops, messy notebooks, stupid memes. It wasn't perfect. We fought sometimes. Missed calls. Misread messages. One night, he got distant and I panicked. He called an hour later, saying he was just overwhelmed and didn't want to dump his bad day on me. We worked through it. Slowly. Patiently. Because we wanted to. Because what we had was more than a summer fling. It was something real, something worth the effort. By the time fall came, we made plans. He'd come visit the city over Thanksgiving. I'd visit Boston in December. We didn't know what the future looked like beyond that, but we knew it would include each other. Sometimes I think back to the beginning, to that first message he sent, asking if I remembered him. How close I came to brushing it off. How easy it would have been to say no, to stay safe, to never open that door. But I did. And it changed everything. And now, even when the days stretch long and the space between us feels impossible, I think back to that summer. The lake. The dock. The way his voice sounded in the quiet. And I know, no matter how far we drift, he was the shore I didn't know I was always drifting toward.